Okay, so today we're getting into a story that honestly reads more like a political thriller than a legal case. But it's actually one of the most important constitutional cases in modern British history. It's all about a secret deportation, a promise that was broken, and a huge legal showdown that asked a really fundamental question about who has the power.
I mean, that's the big question, right? It sounds simple, but the answer to this one question basically decides if you live in a country run by laws or a country run by, well, the whims of whoever's in charge. This case, M versus the Home Office, gave us a dramatic and very definitive answer that still rings true today.
So where does a huge constitutional crisis like this even begin? Well, not in some grand government hall, but with one man's frantic fight to stay in the country. His life was, quite literally, on the line.
What's so wild about this is just how fast it all happened. I mean, just picture it. Lawyers are scrambling, it's a race against the clock. They manage to get a judge on the phone late at night who gets this critical promise from the government. It's called an undertaking. And you gotta understand, that's a super serious, legally binding promise. Once you give it to a court, it's supposed to be unbreakable. The promise was simple. M's plane will not take off. But it did. The plane took off, M was sent back to Zaire, and a direct promise made to a judge was shattered.
You see, this wasn't just some administrative mistake. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the entire court system. As one of the judges, Lord Templeman, later put it, there's this core deal in the UK system. The government, the executive, agrees to play by the court's rules. What happened here basically threatened to tear up that entire agreement.
And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. This was a showdown like no other. On one side, you had the massive power of the government, represented by the Home Secretary, Kenneth Baker. And on the other, you had the authority of the judiciary, the very people whose job it is to make sure everyone follows the law.
Okay, so the government's argument went way back, leaning on this ancient idea called crown immunity. Their logic was basically this. The Home Secretary's job, his office, works for the crown. And since you can't sue the Queen, you can't issue a binding order against the office. In short, they were arguing the office itself was above the law. The court's view? Way simpler. Look, a promise made in our courtroom is a promise you have to keep. If a government minister can just ignore a judge, then what's the point of any court order? They just become polite suggestions.
And suddenly, this whole thing became so much bigger than just one asylum seeker or one broken promise. This was now about the single most important idea holding up the entire British legal system.
And that big idea is the rule of law. The easiest way to think about it is like the rules of a game. The courts, they're the referee. Their job is to make sure everyone, even the star players on the most powerful team, follows the rules. Without that, the game is just chaos. This case was really asking, is the government just another player on the field? Or does it get to be the referee too?
And this question right here gets to the absolute heart of the government's defense. They were essentially asking, does the rule of law really apply to us? You know, the people who are actually running the country. Well, the nation's highest court was about to give them a very clear answer.
All right, let's get to the grand finale. This case climbed all the way up to legal ladder to the House of Lords, which was basically the UK's Supreme Court back then. The country's most senior judges all gathered to deliver a verdict that would literally define the limits of government power for generations.
So how did the judges cut through this whole crown immunity argument? Well, their logic was just brilliant and incredibly simple. They said, first off, a government department isn't some abstract thing floating in the air. It's run by an actual person, a minister. Second, a court order isn't aimed at a building, it's aimed at the person holding that office. So, third, if that person disobeys the order, they are personally responsible. The job title doesn't act like some kind of magic sheep.
And the verdict was historic. For the very first time, a government minister, acting in his official role, was found guilty of contempt of court.
Let that sink in for a second. The highest court in the land had just officially declared that one of the most senior members of the government had acted unlawfully. The message could not have been clearer. You see, this judgment wasn't just a slap on the wrist. No, it was more like a constitutional earthquake, and we're still feeling the aftershocks today.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, this case established the bedrock principle of modern public law in the UK. Seriously, every time you see a news story about a court challenging a new government policy, the ghost of this judgment is right there in the room. It confirmed that the courts have real power to hold the government's feet to the fire, making sure ministers act within the laws that Parliament itself has passed.
And here we are more than 30 years later, and this decision is still a huge deal. It's like this legal shield that protects the rights of regular people by making sure the state has to play by its own rules. It's the reason you and I, or campaign groups, can take the government to court and actually have a chance of winning. It ensures the scales of justice stay balanced, even when you're up against the state itself.
At the end of the day, the story of MV Home Office leaves us with this one essential question. Because in any democracy, power will always be tested. This case gave us a powerful answer. In a nation of laws, it is the independent courts that hold that power to account, and they do it to make sure that power serves the people and not the other way around.